Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Rishi Sunak has found himself fighting a culture war that he didn't even want and has managed to upset literally everyone whilst he's done it. This is a fight which was not part of his election plan and for which he has no obvious allies. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So we were told round about the new year that a key part of the Tory election strategy this year was to get the Rwanda safety bill through the House of Commons in the first month and then move on from that dead-end culture war and focus on the economy, which is what most voters are interested in. This isn't going well. After Sunak removed the whip from Lee Anderson, he's found himself not only embroiled in a related dead-end culture war, but one where he has no obvious allies. And what do I mean by that? There are Tory MPs, egged on by the likes of the Tory client media and Conservative Democratic Organisation and others, who are claiming that Lee Anderson did nothing wrong, should be readmitted to the parliamentary party forthwith. There are also Tory MPs, and a few others, who are kicking back against this. Last night, Tory MP Raymond Christie said in an interview on Sky that Rishi Sunak promised him that he would be committed to dealing with Islamophobia in the party if he became Prime Minister and would work with Christie to do so. This seems to have been during the 2022 leadership contest, which took place after Boris Johnson resigned. Christie then said that Sunak has not even met with him for over a year and a half. Sam Coates of Sky has suggested that he must have thought long and hard before doing this interview. I suppose the implication is that Christie belongs to the moderate wing of the party and would not be keen on helping the far right replace Sunak before the election. But I suppose another implication is that there are some who feel that Sunak cannot simply keep appeasing the far right, which has never and will never support Sunak, at the expense of those who wanted him to succeed, gave him all the leg room he needed to do so. You know, there's a number of Tories have spoken out about Sunak's handling of this crisis. You know, Sunak needs it to die down. He needs it to go away. It's not part of the election strategy. The professional Tory strategists at CCHQ will know that the only useful culture wars are those which are uncomfortable for Labour or maybe the Lib Dems. This one not only isn't difficult for those parties to talk about, but it is another one where Reform UK are more than happy to accept the free publicity on news programmes and shoot their mouths off about it. It is the worst sort of issue to have blown up for the Tories in election year. It is one that is splitting their party. It's one that their opponents are happy to talk about in consistent terms. It's one which helps Reform UK point out that the Tories are trying to have a foot in both camps and end up being weak on everything. Complete nightmare scenario for the Tories. And the coup de grace, think about the timing. We are one week tomorrow. It's the budget, the big pre-election budget. This has been in the diary for a while. It's the Tories' pre-election bribe day. They wanted this to kickstart the campaign proper, with a likely plan to call the election 2 or 3 weeks afterwards for May the 2nd. If this row is still raging into next week, there is a huge danger that the budget will get much less attention. Needless to say, that may well budge the probability of an autumn election slightly higher, although I do have to counter that in another video I'm working on potentially for later today if the news doesn't explode with something major in the next few hours. But can you imagine your big budget flops because you were busy dealing with more infighting, with a culture war you desperately didn't want, so you daren't call a May election because literally nothing you've been doing has been closing the gap in the polls at all. But on the other hand, there's plenty of reasons to suppose things will just get worse in autumn. After all, it's not like you give yourself time for another budget or get to announce it later on. I suppose Sunak could delay the announcement of the budget. He could hold it in the first week of March is early. It's usually a couple of weeks later. He could delay it. And it's not like the budget planning is going well. They're trying to work out a way of cutting income tax substantially without cutting spending in a way which loses them votes and in a way which makes the figures add up. The Institute for Fiscal Studies is the latest group to say this is unicorn bollocks, which is not their exact words. But what on earth does Sunak do? He can't just restore the whip. He would then lose all pretence of authority. He would not only be saying that Lee Anderson did nothing wrong and Rishi Sunak got it wrong, but it would be very obvious he backed down to pressure, and pressure from the very people he shouldn't be backing down to. He ideally needs Anderson to apologise, but Anderson, although saying that maybe his words were clumsy, has insisted that what he said was ultimately correct and that apologising for it would be an act of weakness. And what matters here is what Anderson wants to happen. Where does this political cuckoo see most advantage? In the Conservative Party or with Reform UK? There are pros and cons either way. In the Conservative Party, he's definitely not going to win the next election. However, there is opportunity perhaps. The Tories are going to lose a lot of what they would have considered safe seats in this election. You would expect some of them to flip back at the next election once the current pains are eased by their party being in opposition. If Anderson, in theory, were to move to one of these areas, get himself selected as the candidate, he has a route back into Parliament in a few years' time. The question is, would the sort of local Conservative members living in what would be or what should be a safe seat again in the future adopt him as their candidate? I've said before, they don't really see Anderson as one of them. He's been useful to them, but they don't see him as one of them. He's from an ordinary working class background. It's not even like he made it in business from that background. It's not even like he can say he pulled his socks up and he became a millionaire off his own back. No, before he was an MP, he was on a low income. I think he will find snobbery works against him. Mind you, there's a bit of snobbery with Reform UK as well. Ben Habib, deputy leader, has publicly expressed doubts about him joining. He's tried to claim it's because Anderson isn't clear in his thinking or his expressions. But nor is anyone in Reform UK, Habib included. Clarity of thought is a hindrance for populists. They have to talk in simple, ambiguous terms. So I think Habib's objections are ultimately an expression of snobbery themselves. But if Anderson doesn't think he could be adopted as a future candidate in a winnable seat by the Tories, might he go with Reform UK anyway? Not because that might help him win an election, but because it helps him keep his job on GB News. I don't think his viewing figures will see him as a long-term presenter on the station, if I'm honest. I think if he wants to keep the money rolling in, he has to remain relevant outside of Parliament. He has to be useful to the Tory media. I think he will find it harder to remain relevant after the election. And this matters because Anderson's calculations are vital to Sunak's strategy here. If Anderson is thinking that his best chance is to join Reform UK, Sunak's buggered, there'll be nothing he could do. The row could actually get worse if Anderson defects, because there will then be fears, whether well-founded or not, that others who are looking like losing their particularly red wall seats could defect to Reform UK. The party's chance of winning back Reform UK voters will then seem much smaller. But if Anderson would prefer a way back, if he does see his future with the Conservative Party, then there's hope for Sunak, because then that means Anderson wants something he can give. The problem is, if Anderson thinks that Sunak needs him more than he needs the party, he may imagine he's in a stronger position than he really is. Like in Lee Anderson's head, does he think that Sunak can just back down? Because he really can't. If Sunak wants his big budget to go smoothly next week, he needs to sort this issue out this week. I suspect his line will be to try to get Anderson back into the parliamentary party, get him to say something that isn't an apology but sounds like an apology, tell the moderates not to rock the boat in election year. Now, whether it works is another matter. Maybe Sunak will delay the announcement of the budget, as I said. I'm not sure this is a row that blows over. There has to be a resolution one way or the other. And Sunak, the leader whose first instinct is to run away from every bit of conflict, needs to find it. The longer this goes on, the worse it gets. Nick Ferrari, who, if anything, is usually on the side of the Tories, cut short an interview with Tory Minister Michael Tomlinson this morning because he refused to answer the question, was what Lee Anderson said Islamophobic? The minister kept saying, well, it was wrong. But was it Islamophobic? It was wrong. You know, he was asked point blank several times. Ferrari just got fed up and told him to go away. And remember, while this is going on, Tory strategists will have had a plan for this week. They'll have had a plan for every week leading up to the election, because they know when they want the election to be, even if they're not saying. So there'll have been a plan for this week, which will have all been thrown into the bin. Yet another lesson, if you fight culture wars, you can lose them. And yet they still seem to be failing to learn that lesson. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.